Sorry, the fire alarm is going off now. Ryan, maybe, or Brandon, can one of you guys start moderating? I'll join again in a sec. Sorry.
Sounds good. Good luck. All right. What's that? Ah, cool. Okay, I guess we can get started. Looks like we're already recording, so everyone, welcome to our Amendments for Monday. I believe the topic today is MCAT, how to plan for studying and doing the best you possibly can on that really scary exam. Maybe we can start with some introductions, popcorn style. I can start with Brandon. Some name, year, fun facts about yourself when you took the MCAT. Yeah.
Everyone, I'm Brandon. I am a third-year PhD student doing the MD PhD at UCLA Medical School. I took the MCAT way back in 2018 or something like that. I was a UCLA student. I graduated in 2017. And fun fact about me is I'm a dancer. Let's do popcorn, Anthony.
Hi everyone, my name is Anthony. I'm a third-year medical student in the traditional UCLA Medical School program. And I took the MCAT in January of 2020, right before COVID hit. And a fun fact about me is I really like the Lakers, but I didn't like how they played tonight. So, oh, sorry, popcorn to Guillermo.
Alrighty, so I'm Guillermo. I did not go to UCLA. I went to New Mexico State University. I am from New Mexico. I'm part of the CDU UCLA medical education program, which we are the last class of. And I think I took the MCAT in September of 2021. That was back when they had the afternoon and morning sessions, so I took it in the afternoon. I guess a fun fact about me, I really like photography, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm Ryan Shee. I am in the same cohort as Brandon for the MD PhD program, so third year in the PhD part. I also took the MCAT, I think, somewhere in 2018-ish realm, probably like that summer. And fun fact about me, I guess, Guillermo said New Mexico, and I was born in New Mexico, so sort of been bounced around, but love my home state. Cool, but I guess we can just go ahead and get started. So I think maybe one of the first questions we can talk about is, when approaching the MCAT as like a studying test, from a timeline perspective, how long do you think is an appropriate amount of time, and what factors might influence how that period should look like?
I can start off. So I took about 6 months to study for my MCAT. I was working full-time at the time that I was studying for the MCAT. So I wake up, do my 9 to 5 job, and then go to biomed library, study until midnight, and rinse and repeat every day. And so for me, I needed 6 months because I was working. I didn't have, that much time and energy to dedicate just to full-time studying. Oh, and then I also took the MCAT twice. I voided my score the first time just because I knew I didn't perform as I wanted to. And so that was kind of built into that 6 month time frame, I guess. But everyone has their own timeline. So just because 6 months works for me doesn't mean it'll work for you.
I think for me, I took about 3 months with a 1.5 month about dedicated period. And I think some factors, definitely, as Brian mentioned, having a full-time job or having commitments outside of, studying for the MCAT full-time, and whether you decide to have a quote unquote dedicated period where you're only studying the MCAT and you're not doing anything else, or whether you're doing, you're having your full-time job or doing schoolwork. I was in the middle of school at that time. So I think that, you want to strike a balance between it's not studying enough and studying too much, and then also like forgetting stuff from early in your period. And so I think 3 months was like the right period for me because I wasn't forgetting stuff from early on in my study period, but I wasn't Yeah, just wasn't forgetting stuff as much.
My timeline was very similar to Anthony's. It took about 3.5 months, I want to say, and with about a month and a half dedicated period. I think I was doing a little bit of research, like maybe 10 or 15 hours a week during that time, but it was definitely more dedicated. And towards the earlier part of my 3.5 months, I was dedicating it to content, and then the latter half are going to be more practice questions. But I agree with Anthony in saying that 3.5 times, if you have the ability to have some dedicated time, then I think that's an appropriate amount of time. But as Brandon said, everyone's timeline is going to be a little bit different.
So thank you. I don't think I could have worded it any better. I think there was a little deck that I had made at one point upon a time where I was sort of describing my recommendations for timeline. And it was essentially like there are a couple questions that if you answer yes to for all of them, then you can consider maybe a shorter timeline. But if one of them is maybe no, then consider a 3 or longer months, 3-month or longer timeline. I think if I remember correctly, those questions are like if you have a good sort of long-term attention span, you have not many really obligations to take care of besides your MCAT studying. You are pretty confident in sort of the exposure you've already had to the topics for the MCAT. There might have been a fourth one, but essentially all of those factors, they all coalesced. My recommendation was you can start considering things shorter than 3 months, but otherwise 3 months and longer tends to be a good spot to be. I also took the MCAT twice, like Brandon. The first time I actually did not void my score, so I had 2 scored MCATs. And the first time around, I kind of did all of those things wrong. I plans to use the whole summer as the study period, but eventually just got really inundated with my research and only studied full time for like 2 weeks, which I do not recommend by any stretch of the imagination. Second time around, did a much more dedicated period and found that to be useful. Awesome. So maybe we can sort of morph into the next question there with, it sounds like a lot of people had very sort of instigated timelines, and you controlled when you studied, where you studied, how you studied. What are your thoughts on some of the courses that exist out there? Do you think they would have been helpful? Or do you sort of recommend doing a study only timeline that's based on your own experiences and books? Or what is your recommendation in terms of resources? And yes, I will promote to panelists.
So I did Princeton Review. I paid for the whole shebang for Princeton Review. I also used Khan Academy, found a variety of like third-party like example tests online. I would say out of all the resources I used, I think Khan Academy was the best resource. The Princeton Review was very expensive for me, but whether or not I benefited from it, I mean, I got the score I wanted, but in reality, I probably didn't need it. Khan Academy is a great free resource, tons of videos on every single topic you would need to know. So I think for me, if I could go back in time, I would probably just primarily rely on Khan Academy.
In terms of study resources that I used, I mean, I mainly used UWorld, and that was pretty much it. And I ended up doing about half of the UWorld QBank before I switched over to the official AMC materials, which I highly recommend. And in terms of like Psych and Soc, for example, the Khan Academy document, it's like a 500-page document or something like that. That's very helpful. And there's like an abbreviated 100-page version of the Khan Academy, like vocab for Psychs and Soc. So I felt that was very helpful for at least having an idea of that section. But otherwise, UWorld was really good for me because it gave me the opportunity to practice, but also to learn through practice questions. The only thing I wouldn't recommend from UWorld is the cars section, and I don't recommend any of the third-party cars. And then AMC official materials closer to my test date.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if it's my turn. I just want to introduce myself. I had the wrong Zoom link, so I was a participant instead of a panelist for a little bit, but now I'm a panelist, which is fun. My name is Jade. I'm a third-year medical student in Anthony's class at UCLA and also in the Drew program. And I gather the question is about like resources and what we recommend for the MCAT. So I took it twice as well. The first time I did sort of quote unquote everything right, and the second time I did sort of everything wrong, but I did much better the second time than the first time. So my little plug is that like there's no perfect way to study for the MCAT. Everybody's, you know, it's a very personalized situation. You got to feel out what's best for you. The first time I did the Berkeley review course, it's I think there are multiple locations, but I'm like from Westwood, so there's a Westwood location and class, and it's like 6 days a week, which is a bit of a drag, but it gives you like a really nice structure, and they give you a lot of materials with the price of the course. It's very expensive, so it's obviously not available to everybody, but it comes with I think like 4 practice exams plus a whole bunch of study materials, and a very like regimented schedule. The reason I say I did everything right, quote unquote, is because I went to every single class. I followed their study schedule to a T, which meant that if they said study cars this many times a week, then I did it. If they said do this many practice questions in biochem, then I did it. And I think the reason it didn't work out for me is because I was not like tuning it to my needs enough. You know, I was naturally pretty good at cars, unlike, I guess, you know, the general pre-med population. And so it was tailored to someone who maybe needed a lot more help in cars, but I probably could have afforded to not do that very much and study more biochem and chem physics. But I kind of followed all of their structure. And because of that, my score sort of showed. Like cars, I did pretty well because I didn't really need all that much help. And the things that I probably should have spent more time focusing on were weaker. And I had like no extracurriculars. I was studying during the summer. I had like no classes that I was taking, no extracurriculars, nothing fancy. It was really just studying every day, all day. The second time I took it, it was during my first gap year. And it was, I was also taking 2 classes at UCLA Extension and working full time as a medical scribe, and didn't take a prep course. I just kind of used the materials that I had from the first course, and made my own schedule, which I think was really better. I focused much more on the 2 like fields that I really was struggling with the first time around. And then the 2 classes I was taking at UCLA Extension were, one was physiology and the other was biochem. And so between those 2, it sort of bolstered my biochem score, which was my weakest one the first time around. And I ended up improving like many percentiles, just by focusing my studies on myself. In terms of resources, I mainly just used the prep course stuff from Berkeley Review. I thought it was pretty good in terms of like a comprehensive like foundational thing. And then I used a lot of AAMC's question banks. I found this to be really helpful, especially as I got closer to the test. And then in terms of total time, I think both were like 2 to 2.5 months.
Yeah, so I took a very I guess you could say financially conservative approach, and I guess my recommendations, and if you were in a position like mine where you maybe couldn't afford a prep course, is to use everything that was free. So that includes Khan Academy. I would probably get the cheapest books, cheapest content books that you can find. I use Kaplan, and I would probably buy anything past 2019. I really don't think you're going to benefit much from getting the newest version, if at all. And then I also decided to use Anki, which is free on your computer. The Mile Down deck is what I used. My approach was using like a minimal amount of content and then like cater your time to whatever your weaknesses might be. And so I decided to do the bare bones. So that's going to include the Mile Down deck, which is the smallest deck that's available. And then I went ahead and used the 86-page document. Again, same philosophy, focus on the areas that you're weakest in. And then other resources that I used were were Reddit and Discord. At least at the time, maybe it was because of COVID, but like there was like certain like Discord channels where like people would ask each other questions and you would help people with their questions. And so if you can find the community like that, maybe that might benefit you. And then Reddit, every single question that you might have that the explanation is not enough for, you're likely going to find it on Reddit. So I use that as a resource as well. The only thing that I did decide to invest in was UWorld, and I would 100% recommend everyone, sorry about that, everyone invest in UWorld. I think that was probably the thing that I would 100% save up for and don't regret one bit spending the money on. I know it's expensive. At this point, I think there's enough AMC material that if you're a fee assistance program candidate, which I was, I feel like you might have enough where you don't necessarily need to buy anything other than UWorld in my opinion.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for the really comprehensive answers. Yeah, I think there are a lot of resources out there, and I think a very common thread you'll get from the responses here is that there are a lot of recommendations out there as to how to study for the MCAT, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a more personalized, custom approach that will maybe take some trial and error up front, but once you start settling on the resources and how to spend your time and where to focus your attention, that you'll kind of build a better plan that fits your needs. I think there are so many resources out there. For me personally, I did use the Kaplan book set, and I'd echo Guillermo's point that you don't need the most up-to-date version. Usually like the 2023 copy, for example, is just going to have some updated, more fancy pictures and images rather than like actually different content. So I would agree that you can afford to look back a couple of years for the books if you're looking for a book set. And those tend to be cheaper, whether it's from like a past student or somewhere online. In regards to the question that was posted to the Q&A about how to use the AAMC official materials, I think a lot of people mentioned that they use those closer to the actual exam date. So I think a common sort of thread that I witnessed when I was sort of asking other people how they did it, and I think how a lot of panelists on the call here have mentioned, typically, you might start with a more third-party resource like Kaplan or Princeton Review or something like that. And then as you get closer to your exam, you sort of shift attention from content review more towards now testing yourself with Q banks like UWorld and AAMC. For me personally, I used the 3 or 4 available sort of past AAMC exams every week leading up to the exam. My weekly structure was take the test on a Saturday as if it was the real thing. Sunday was all review, going through a massive spreadsheet that I had for how to sort of keep track of questions, topics, and all of that, how I was doing. And then Monday, Tuesday was more sort of like shore up the weaknesses. And then I would start bleeding back into, more practice towards the tail end of the week in preparation for the next practice exam. So I think, generally people like to use the AAMC materials as close to the actual test date as possible, just because they tend to be the most representative. Any additional thoughts people want to add on that? All right, cool. So maybe we can move into sort of the next question in terms of, and maybe this is a little related to the point I was describing with my spreadsheet, but, when you're taking a practice test, how do you get the most bang for your buck? How did you approach both using the practice test to be representative for your experience in the actual exam day? And then after the test, what did you do with the results and how did you use it to guide your future studies?
Yep. So the MCAT is an 8-hour test, or it was an 8-hour test when I took it. And so when you do the practice test, you definitely want to practice sitting there for the whole 8 hours, taking the breaks as if you would during the test day, because 8 hours is a long time to sit down and be like 100% focused. For me, what I would do is similarly, I would take a practice test on the weekend, review all the questions I got wrong, and then kind of make a checklist of all the subjects that I needed to refresh on the following week. And then for me, since I use Khan Academy and a lot of video-based learning materials, I would force myself to rewatch whatever video on the topic that I missed. So for example, if I missed glycolysis, a question on glycolysis, I would force myself as punishment to rewatch the entire freaking video on glycolysis, even if it was a stupid mistake, because that would motivate me to try to minimize the number of mistakes I would make on, especially silly mistakes on questions like that. That was a system that worked for me because I don't like studying, and forcing myself to study is a punishment. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I would echo what everyone has already said. Just treat the practice test like it's a real test, and set yourself time to do it. And then also set yourself time afterwards to review very thoroughly. So for everything that you got right, I would say that I would take a look at if I actually knew it or if I just kind of guessed and got it right. And so even for the ones that you guessed and got it right, I would go back and make a note of each question that I on a spreadsheet similar to Ryan, of what I missed and why I missed it. So there's the main reasons why you'll miss a question is because you don't know it, you didn't read it well enough, or understand the question. So if you can identify which errors you're making more of, then you can really see, do I have true knowledge content gaps? Do I just need to shore up on taking more test questions so I can be a better test taker? So really seeing patterns and seeing where your weaknesses are and really focusing your next week of study on those weaknesses will really help. Yeah.
Yeah, I echo everything that everyone has said, especially reviewing the things that you got right, because you never know what you're just guessing on versus what you actually know. And even if you already know it, like, it's good to reinforce that reasoning, be like, oh, why did I think this? Okay, this was the right reasoning. Great. The other thing about like treating it like a real test is like, I treated it like a real test down to like the breaks and what food I was eating. I like ate the same stupid Starbucks salad like 4 weeks in a row because I wanted to like mentally and physically be in the correct headspace. And that's not important for everybody, but I think it was for me, especially like, some things, like, especially if it's like super high in sugar, you'll get like a food coma or like crash after like a particular section. So timing even like your meals or your snacks or like your bathroom breaks, whatever, to try and match what your experience is going to be on the real day is really important. If just to like not be nervous and to just already have sort of seen everything coming ahead of time.
Yeah, I don't know if I didn't have the bandwidth to thoroughly review third-party exams, probably to the extent that maybe other folks did. But I personally like looked at it the day after. I did take them also on the weekend, once a week, after doing UWorld all week long. But the day of review, I was mostly looking for patterns. And what I actually used to thoroughly review was going to be UWorld, because I feel like some of these third-party exams got to about 70% of the way that the AMC asked questions. But I felt like UWorld got me to about 90 to 95% of the way the AMC asked questions. And so when it came to thorough review, it was mostly based off of UWorld. And I guess just because I see that this is probably not going to be a question, which is how to use UWorld, I would personally recommend that you do tutor untimed. And it's kind of following a similar train of thought as to like how you guys were mentioning, for example, how you would review exams, which is like identifying flaws in logic and the way that you're interpreting the questions. And so I would use it to tutor untimed and review every single question immediately after. This is just the way I did it. Obviously everyone can do it a little bit differently, but I did it like this because I wanted to immediately correct that logic and then make sure that the following question, if it was similar, then I could address the question correctly because my logic would be corrected by the previous question, if that makes any sense. And so again, it was mostly harping on patterns and patterns of thinking, so that you can correct those and hopefully on test day have a better understanding of the way questions are asked.
Awesome. Yeah, everyone. Yeah, I think I would agree in that when I was first starting out doing like practice questions and practice tests, I think I had a similar approach where I took things untimed just to A, get used to the format of the exam, and B, also, as was just mentioned, sort of correct in real time and adapt my thinking to make sure that I was approaching questions correctly. As I moved into dates that were closer to the exam, I started taking like under timed conditions exactly how the test was. I took the exact same length of breaks, and I also was kind of anal about the things that I ate, what snacks I had, like Jade had mentioned. One of my friends who's now a resident, but she did the exact same thing and like whittled it down to like the same number of like gummies for her snack, the same exact food prepared in the same way at the same time, same bathroom break, etc. So, you know, you can be anywhere on that spectrum. But I think the important thing is that, you know, you feel most comfortable with how you've approached it. In terms of how I did my review, I mentioned the spreadsheet. I know some people have interest in that. So if I'm able to manage this screen sharing business, hopefully this will do so appropriately. But this is from a deck that I had made, that maybe I mentioned earlier, but it's kind of like an example of how I structured my review. And I will say this might be on erring on the side of like too much because I spent a massive amount of time doing this. But for example, this was from the first practice test I took. I guess this was the Chem Phys section. You know, I had it labeled by the number of question. I had a binary indicator on whether it was answered correctly or not. And then I followed that up with whether I was confident or not. So I think Anthony mentioned that, you know, many times you answer a question correctly, but if you're only screening for things that you got wrong after the fact, then you'll never pick up things that you guessed on but ended up getting correctly. So that was one way that I tried to screen for that. I also tried to, when I look back at the questions, look at how many choices I was guessing between, and then reason, you know, why I was choosing between those and not the others, and were there wording choices that were tripping me up or something like that. I had a brief summary of the topic, sort of whether it was a question flagged for review or not. And then this last column here, which is type, people were mentioning patterns. And I think this was actually what made the really big difference for me between my first and second exam, in that I started to pick up on patterns, namely in the cars section, where it wasn't necessarily the content that was throwing me off. It was how the question was worded. Very specifically, whenever the question was asking me to put myself in the shoes of the author, I was always messing it up. So this isn't necessarily something that sort of is out there in the ether, but rather an approach that I took. But I came up with a little key that I used to sort of screen questions and bin them into types. And I found that in the cars section, more often than not, the questions that I got wrong or were guessing the most on were the ones that were classified under the A category. So again, just an example of what things you might think of doing if you feel like it would be helpful. That was sort of my approach there. I guess we are kind of approaching the next section. Most other people have further points to add on about sort of study strategies, whatnot. All right, maybe we can sort of move into the next half, if you will, of the panel, which is going to focus, instead of the preparatory phase, now on it's test day, how to, you know, ensure maximum chance of success. So maybe we can just start off very briefly, you know, what were the things, like what routine did you have leading up to test day, and then on test day, what did your routine look like?
I didn't really have a routine. The only like special thing that I did on test day was, again, at the time that I took this test, which was years ago, they gave you about 15 minutes to read the instructions. And during those 15 minutes, I like transcribed from memory my like physics equation sheet on what like the whiteboard that they gave us. And so even though I knew all the like equations in my head, it was great to have like a physical like cheat sheet, just like physically there to quickly reference. And so that doesn't eat into any of your test taking time, because it's like they gave us 15 minutes to just like read the instructions, and I already knew how to take the test. So that was the only special thing I did on test day.
I didn't have a particular routine either, but I think that definitely like in the week leading up to the exam, I tried to sleep earlier and earlier each day to try to like prepare myself for waking up earlier each day. So like just like a half hour earlier each day until like test day was like 5 a.m. basically waking up. And then on test day, I would say that those 15 minutes you can also use to write down some, you know, some biochem pathways. Those are really hard to get straight. And then I would say that just for food purposes, I like went with a little bit of caffeine, but not too much, where you want to pee like a racehorse essentially, but like just enough to kind of like get you awake, and then not a lot of carbs because that equals food coma. So I tried to really avoid carbs, like loaded carbs, just like a lot of like nuts and proteins, and just little snacks throughout the day instead of a large meal.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like Brandon said, I am such a believer in the cheat sheet. I heard from someone maybe you're not allowed to do that. I really hope that's not true, because that was such a helpful thing for me. And I practiced that every day, basically from the beginning of my study time until the day I took the test, both times around. Because I noticed every single practice test had like at least 2 or 3 questions about like which amino acid is this, or like which R group, you know, is this, which blah 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 amino acids. And so I just started, maybe this was a waste of time, but every single time I would start studying, I would get out a blank piece of paper and write down my entire cheat sheet and put a 15-minute timer on. And I was able to write every amino acid, like draw the structure, the 3-letter code, the 1-letter code, every, you know, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the pentose phosphate pathway, like every biochemical pathway, whatever physics reactions I could remember, everything that, like, yeah, I knew somewhere in the brain, but like, why bother thinking about, oh, what is this pathway, when you can just like look at it, you know, on the paper. And it's really muscle memory. By the time you do it, you know, once a week or once every couple of weeks, like you're not even thinking about it, you're just writing it out. And I could probably still write all of the I could probably still write all the R groups to this day, 3 years later, even though I have no use for them at all, because I did it so many times. And then I sort of mentioned about like practicing what you're eating, when, you know, how much coffee you're drinking when you're going to the bathroom and stuff. Also, like, there is like a very psychological like aspect to this exam, or like any standardized test. You know, I just took step 1 a couple weeks ago, and it never ends. There's just so many standardized tests for no good reason at all. And it can be really anxiety like provoking to like have to take this 8-hour long exam where they could ask you anything about anything. And so just like, no matter how badly you think a section goes, or like how many questions you're like dwelling on, like erase them from your brain. The minute you're done with the section, it's over, it's in the past, you can't do anything about it. Just like take the break to reset, you know, do a power pose if that helps you, and just like tell yourself that it's all going to be okay, because it will. I promise you, everything will be okay. It's really not that big of a deal at the end of the day. It feels like the biggest deal in the world, but you know, by the time you're attending, no one's going to ask you what your MCAT score was. So it's not a big deal. So yeah, confidence, plan out your meals, and do a cheat sheet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably just going to drive the point home to go ahead and time your amount of coffee or caffeine or whatever you're doing, and also pay attention to how much water you're drinking, and pay attention to whatever meal works for you. Personally, I decided to go with bagels and peanut butter, but that's just a suggestion. But yeah.
Awesome. I'll just add a couple of points on. I, for one, liked my Welch's fruit snacks, but I'm not sure if that's the best in terms of looking at sugar. For my routine, I actually was probably like a little over the top on the day before, and that I went to the exact same test facility I was going to go to for my day of test. I sat with all the kids who were taking the MCAT day prior, as if I was one of them, and sort of timed how long it would take me to get from the room to the bathroom, just so I had that little nugget of info in my brain. Probably way over the top, but it just gave me a little bit of peace of mind. On the day of, you know, as people mentioned, I sort of started whittling my sleep time to be more akin to what it would be like on the actual test day. And I have discovered that I really like blasting a certain song that changes on day-to-day basis, but blasting a song. And so that morning it was High Hopes by Panic at the Disco, because it was like thematic for the test that I was taking. So I found that really helpful, but kind of also touching on what Jade said about, how to handle in between each section. There were times where in my practice tests, I was so much dwelling on the previous section that I forgot to sort of recalibrate for the next one. And I would definitely encourage you to use that approach at each break time between sections, just sort of reset, recalibrate. And I found the best way to do that for me was to actually remind myself of all the things that I knew and remember just off the top of my head of the upcoming section. So for example, if I was heading into the physics section, I actually didn't write my physics equations down as a cheat sheet because I had done like tons of physics in undergrad, but not so much bio. So that was my weak spot. But I would just remind myself, VF equals VI plus AT, like just off the bat. It gave me a confidence boost, but B just sort of started priming my memory for the topics that I would be seeing in the questions. So I found that really helpful. And at the end, when they ask you sort of that question about whether to void or not, I tried to upfront, have a very crystal clear idea of in my mind what I was going to answer for that. And yeah, during the test, it's kind of like fluctuated, but I think at the end, usually I was really trying to be, fully for one or fully for the other. And I guess the last bit, which I'll also turn to a question for the other panelists, was when I was going through questions, you have the option to flag things and go back for further review. And I found in my practice tests, I tended to flag more than I actually had time to go back and review. And so for the day of exam, I actually started taking a more conservative approach in that, like, okay, if I have so much guessing going on that I'm really unsure, then I'll come back to it. But if I'm really choosing maybe between two, I might write the question down, but I won't flag it. So that way, when I did have some time to review, I would spend that time on the questions that I was needing the most help on. So I'll turn that into a question for the other panelists. This is coming from also a question on our list in terms of the time management aspect. During the exam, how did you manage your time? Are you aiming to get through questions, like see every question 2 times per section, or is it, see every question once? How did you manage flagging? What was your approach there?
I want to briefly go back to like the day of question really quick. It sounds like everyone had some sort of like, oh, eat this ritual, go to the bathroom at this time ritual, and consume some amount of caffeine ritual. And I'll be the one to say that you don't have to do that. I didn't do any of that. Like I just ate whatever random lunch or dinner I had the day that I was taking my test. If that gives you peace of mind, then you should do it, but don't feel like you have to do it. And then, so for time management, for me, I did utilize the flagging system. My approach was if I didn't know the answer to a question, I would guess, because getting a question wrong is still better than, well, not better, but like at least you have a probability of guessing it right versus leaving it completely empty. You're 100% going to get it wrong. So I would guess and flag it. And I would not spend a lot of time on questions that I didn't know, because if I didn't know right then and there, I probably wouldn't know, after wasting 5 minutes on it. So I would guess, flag it, move on. And if I had time at the end, I would go back to the questions I had flagged. Anywhere from like 3 to 5 per section is what I ended up flagging. And when I reviewed the flagged questions, if I still didn't know it, I was like, all right, time to move on to the next flagged question. And so you just have to be realistic about like, do you know it or not? Will you know it after spending a significant amount of time, thinking about it?
I agree with Brandon, and for that reason, I didn't flag any of my questions because when I saw a question, I really thought, seeing it again won't really make that much of a difference, and it's eating away into time that I probably. So I'm like, I'm probably going to miss this question, so I should probably just guess and move on, kind of thing. So I would like when I saw a question, I would think this is the last time I'm going to see this question, and then I just wouldn't, and then I would kind of pace myself throughout the section, like having about a minute and a half per question. And I think that like by the halfway mark, like 45 minutes, you want to be like about halfway through the section. So I kind of just timed myself that way to make sure that I was on time, but tried not to spend too much time on any one question. And if I knew I was spending a lot of time, then I knew I was probably going to miss it. So just did that and moved on.
Yeah, similarly, I'm not big on flagging questions. I do it sometimes, but it's very specific. Mostly because I found that in my practice test, and this is true for step one also, sorry, it's sort of a step one panel in my head because I literally just took this test. But I found a lot of times that when I would mark something on a practice test, if I went back, I would convince myself why I was wrong and then choose something else. And then in reviewing the actual exam, I'd be like, damn, my first instinct was almost always right. And I always talk myself out of the right answer, which is just silly. So you don't talk yourself out of the right answer. You probably, if you have an instinct, a gut reaction, it's probably right. The exception to that is if some questions, require a little bit more thought process. Maybe it's like a secondary or tertiary question as opposed to like a strict identification type of thing. And I knew that if I just had a little bit more time, then I could like work out the correct answer and figure out exactly what was right. But I didn't have time in that moment. I would be stressing out and spending too much time on it. So I picked, a gut reaction or just sort of guessed and then moved on in the interest of time and flagged it so that in case I did have extra time at the end of the section, I could come back and actually try and work out that problem using, whatever extra time I had. So yeah, I would use the flagging mechanism only if like you are sure that you could get something right or like you just need a little bit more time to think about it. But not if you're just like, oh man, I really don't know. Chances are if you don't know now, you're not going to know later. So just do your best thing, take your best guess and move on.
Yeah, so I guess just to add a little bit to that, if I'm not mistaken, you get about an hour and 15 minutes per section. I think it's something like 59 questions for most of them, except cars. It's something weird for cars. But like, for example, I used kind of like a similar approach to Anthony, where like I gave myself like a certain amount of time to kind of like know whether I was on time or not. So for example, on the first half, let's say 30 questions of a section, I would give myself a little bit more time just because I knew that I would have to prime my brain for the kind of questions that they were asking. And so like, let's say in the first 29 or 30 questions, I would give myself 40 minutes. And then the second half would be 35 minutes because you're kind of already primed. And then I would also kind of like keep a checklist of how many questions I'm flagging. So like, pretty much per section, I gave myself about 6 or 7 where I could just like straight up flag and it's okay if I don't know it. And obviously just like leave an answer because it's in your best interest, as Brandon mentioned, to have a chance of getting it right. And it's in your best interest to look at every single question on an exam section instead of like focusing on any 1 or 2 questions. Because if you focus on 2 questions and let's say you do get them right, but you miss 6 at the end of it, 6 on a topic that you happen to be pretty strong in, then I feel like you wasted the opportunity to get 6 questions right instead of like missing 2 of them. So like instead of missing 2, you now miss 6 because you didn't get to it. And so I would definitely be pretty deliberate in flagging and moving on and just making sure that you're looking at every single question in this section.
Great. Thanks for the responses, everyone. Yeah, I guess I sort of provided my piece at the beginning, but I would just echo that. I think it's really important to get eyes on every question at some point. Don't want to leave any question without it having been seen. So maybe we can move on into as sort of our minutes before the Q&A, more into sort of a mental headspace question set, in the sense that like, this test is very anxiety inducing. It can be intimidating. A lot sort of is perceived to be riding on it. So as you were studying and as you were taking the test, and I guess maybe afterwards, how did you deal with your mental state in each of those phases? What strategies did you take to ensure that when you were taking breaks, you were able to take breaks? When you were studying, you were fully studying and sort of engaged, and just sort of maintaining a self-awareness and self-care?
For me, not gonna lie, studying for the MCAT was like one of the toughest times in my life because again, I hate studying, and yeah, I just really had to study really hard. And I took the test twice, so like I just hated the MCAT so much. And I was working full time, so I was like perpetually tired. But what I did to take care of myself was every Friday night I would cut my, I wouldn't study until midnight. I would end studying early and then go out and party with my friends in West Hollywood. And that just gave me space away from work, away from studying. And it, you know, it was like a weekly ritual where I would just go out and have fun, not worry about any of this MCAT madness. And that was enough to keep me sane for 6 months.
I think for me, and this is probably referencing to the question that was asked in the chat, you know, when you're taking a break, for sure, you definitely don't want to be thinking about studying. I know it's like the hardest thing, but like when you're on your break, it'll feel refreshing when you haven't thought about it, and then you come back to it. So I would say for me, I tried to take really deliberate breaks. So if I was going to take a break, I made sure that I wasn't studying or doing anything related to studying and just being in the zone of taking the break. And you definitely want to take breaks because the test does burn you out if you study really hard every single day. And then in terms of, I forgot the point I was wanting to make. I'll get back to it at some point.
Oh my gosh, I cannot work Zoom. Yeah, I mean, I didn't take a whole 6 months. I did 3 months for my first test and then was like, I can't do this anymore. So I took a year off before I attempted it a second time. So 6 months is tough. But I think having a really deliberate schedule and treating it like a job, like, you know, like you go to work from 9 to 5 and then when you clock out, you're done. Like you don't go back to work if you're off the clock. So the same should be true about studying. I think like your break should really be your break, or like your day off should really be your day off, especially if you have 6 months. Like plug in days off. Okay, maybe it's not going to be every week when you're a couple months out, but in the beginning you can certainly have a day off a week. And just like scheduling time off and making that like your sacred happy time, that's really important, because burnout is so real and it's only the beginning of a super duper long journey that is very exhausting. Take it from us, we're tired and we're not even done yet. We're not even like halfway done yet. So make sure that you are practicing self-care. If that means like going out to WeHo, or if it means like, I don't know, chilling with your cat and watching a bad Netflix movie, whatever, like do something, and do not just like turn your brain off from studying and just be in relaxation mode.
So I mean, I kind of didn't really take days off, but I guess the approach that I had was don't do anything you don't want to do. And so what I mean by that is, like, if that day you really don't want to study physics, then don't study physics. Look at whatever's the least miserable that day, because it's all pretty miserable, to be honest. And so that's probably one of the things that I would do is focus on studying the material that you want to study that day. And then also, sorry, I also blanked. God. Yeah, so study the material you want to, and then also, like, if you feel like you only have it in you to do 20 questions that day, then only do 20 questions. And I think that's probably the way that I avoided burning out, was by kind of navigating studying that way.
I did remember the point I wanted to make, and the point I wanted to make was that, like, something that I think one part of the question was like, how did you motivate yourself through studying? And so something that I did was like setting mini goals for myself, achievable goals. So like doing like one question better on a UWorld block or something like that, just something like really simple, but something that would be like, wow, I'm actually making progress. Because if you feel like you're not making progress, it can feel really like defeating to like study for the MCAT and be like, I'm not making the progress that I want. So like setting like really, you know, small goals about like just getting one question more right a day or a week or something like that, whatever is realistic for you, was really motivating for me. And I kind of mapped it out on a spreadsheet so I could see the line kind of go up and be like, wow, I've actually made a lot of progress since I started.
I would echo that. I'm a big checklist person. I like to check off boxes. So I had a similar strategy, and just, maybe I had a list of, questions or topics or sections I wanted to get through on a given day, and I would just sort of tick things off as I went. the little surge of happy chemicals that comes about from that was enough sort of a during study basis that really helped me out. I think I also mentioned that my sort of weekly paradigm was to take a practice test on a Saturday, and I sort of religiously made it the case that the afternoon after that practice test was free time. As in, I just, took a full length test. I did not want to, jump straight back into studying or even look at the test and how I did, even though I was very tempted to. That was the sacred time that I would just set aside to do things that I enjoyed. And I also found that it was helpful to schedule things with other people so that I didn't, in my sort of moments of weakness or whatnot, sort of peek at the exam and then sort of go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, I saw this question that I got wrong. Let me go research it, whatnot. So I would schedule things with people so that I had to go somewhere else and do something. And usually, being with those individuals really helped me sort of get my mind out of the MCAT mode and, start to enjoy the time that I did have for breaks. And I would also say, I think Jade had mentioned at some point, for at least for the sections of the test, when you're done with one, you're done with it, right? Like there isn't anything you can do about it. So just sort of like recalibrate and move on. And that was my approach after the test too. And I would imagine everyone here on the call would echo similar sentiments in that like there is really nothing you can do after that test is done and you press submit. I think the best approach is instead, focus on the things that you can actionably work towards, whether it's elements of your application or something else, or, taking time to congratulate yourself on the fact that you just took this really, really hard and, really tiring test, because it is a feat and it is a milestone that, once you complete, should give yourself congratulations for it. So I think that was typically my general approach. But I guess since we've kind of reached the end here in terms of our sort of agenda-based sections, we have a number of questions on a sort of a Google sheet that we have that we can delve into, or if people have any questions from our sort of individuals on call, we can answer in live time for the Q&A. I will say that there was a question, I think, in our Q&A that asked about scores. So if people are comfortable either saying or writing down their scores onto that question, please feel free, but don't feel any pressure to do so. But yeah, I guess we'll take a moment, see if any questions come in the Q&A. And I guess while we do that, maybe we can each go around, maybe give any sort of like final thoughts or words of encouragement, little pep talk or something. Since I know a number of people are taking it early 2024. I guess I'll start. So I take every opportunity I can to tell people that, it's really easy as you're doing something, especially in the pre-med role, to look around and see what everyone else is doing and feel like, oh, I should be doing what that person's doing. Oh, I see a different strategy over there. I should be doing what that person's doing. And I think it's really important to use those opportunities to see what people are doing, but not let them directly impact and sort of make you feel like you have to do the exact same thing. Because inevitably you will be torn and sort of bounced around like a ping pong ball across all the different strategies that people are taking, and you won't really settle into your niche of how you work best. So I would really say, the best way to approach this is to find your best way, because everyone's best way is going to be different. And as part of that, I would also say, as looking around, you'll see so many other students, and you may see somebody do something that you think you should be doing because they did better than you did at that section or something. And I think in response to that, I would remind you, you are not better than anyone else because of what you've done or what you are going to do. And you're not worse than anyone else because of what you have done or what you're going to do. You're different than everyone else. You cannot be copied from any other person on the planet in terms of your experiences, your background, your goals, your ambitions. And because of that, you will be a catch for any medical school. So, do your best on this test. You will do amazingly, regardless of what that number is on the back end. And any medical school who can get their hands on you will be very lucky to have you. I'll pass it off to my other panelists.
I'll just say that I have sat and reviewed applications for people applying into medical school, and every single time I look at the MCAT score, I'm like, good enough. Like, I have never dinged anyone because of their MCAT score. I feel like, for me anyways, and I'm sure there are other application reviewers like myself, where if they see a number and they're satisfied with it, they're going to move on and, go look at the more interesting parts of the application, which are like your personal statements, your essays, letter of recommendations, and so on and so forth. So as a reviewer, I personally do not put that much weight on the MCAT or the GPA, and I'm sure there are other people reviewing applications who are just like me.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that as well. Like a score in the long run really does not matter that much. It feels like it's the most important thing in the world, but we have, classmates who got like just over a 500 at UCLA School of Medicine, just like the rest of us. Like, no, not a big deal. Someone, just like Ryan said, I loved what he said, like you are going to be a great candidate to someone somewhere. And I promise you that no matter what the score is on the back end. And also just echo the point about like, once the test is over, it's over. Like, don't think about it. It's not going to do you any good. Like, you're going to dwell on like, oh my gosh, there's this one question that I know I got wrong, and oh, this one and that one. It's like, it's not going to do you any good. You can't go back. You can't change your answer. You have to sort of wait in limbo for your score anyway. So like, treat yourself. You just took a massive, awful test. Do something fun for yourself and focus on something else. And then, also really wanted to echo the point about personalization of the experience, both for the MCAT, but just generally for the application. Once you get to the essay writing portion, especially with like secondaries, well, first with the personal statement, like you're going to be tempted to get as many opinions as possible, which isn't a bad thing. You do want to have other eyes on it, but at some point, everyone will start to have different opinions. One person's going to love one thing and hate that, someone else will hate the exact same thing. And then you'll be like, what am I supposed to do? At the end of the day, this is your application to medical school. You want to show these schools who you are, why you want to be a doctor, why you want to go to their school, why you're in this in the first place. And, you can just use everybody as like ideas. But at the end of the day, this is your application. So don't be torn too much between multiple different people. Go with your gut and, put your best foot forward and whatever that means for you.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better than my fellow panelists. I would just say, keep it short, keep the end goal in mind. I mean, you didn't really decide to become a doctor so that you could take the MCAT. You take the MCAT so you can be a doctor, right? So it's just one step towards, being a doctor, and one score, as everyone has said, is really not going to define you, how smart you are, quote unquote, and how good of a doctor you're going to be. You're all going to be really great doctors because you walked on this path, and we need all of you. So that's all to say.
I don't have much to add. I feel like everyone covered that perfectly.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to take a moment as we end here just to thank all the panelists for their time. I know all of you have probably very insane schedules and a lot of commitments, whether in or outside the clinic. So thank you for giving us a bit of your evening today. I think there were some questions in the chat asking for emails with which a number of people have responded. So please feel free to reach out to us personally. But I would also just make a quick plug for the Med Mentors advising platforms. You can go to our website at, if you Google like Med Mentors at UCLA, you'll find our page. And then if you go to the advising platform, I think we're under construction for a new one. I actually don't know if it's quite up yet, but definitely stay tuned for that. There are one-on-one advising opportunities for that. And there's also pages called Ask the Med Mentors. If you come across an impression of your own or someone else's that you want to ask us, you can ask us and we'll sort of field those as quickly as possible. But yeah, so I hope this section was really useful for everyone. Thank you again to the panelists again for your time. Thank you to the panel attendees as well for taking some time to listen to us and whatnot. And with that, I'll wish everyone a good evening. Thank you, everyone. I see a Q&A chat here, so I'll try to answer it really quickly, Catherine. Self-studying for subjects if we weren't able to get to the class with some time not recommended. So I would say, I think for self-studying, you really can make it your own in terms of how you go about it. There were a number of classes that I did not take prior to taking the exam that may have been helpful, but I think as long as you sort of stay disciplined with studying material through either a book or a course or something where you can get access to it from a definitive source, it really isn't going to hurt you if you haven't yet taken that material as part of the class. So. Guess I'll stay on for another minute in case anyone has last minute questions. Right, looks like no further questions. So for the remaining attendees, thanks for coming and hope to see you on a future MedMentor Monday. All right, have a good evening, everyone.